Hello everybody, welcome back to Sophos Naked Security Live. I am Paul Ducklin once again for our Friday evening fun with a serious side, and as you can see, today's topic is ICU. How much do your home working photos give away? And the reason that I chose to talk about this week is that we had a guest author. He's written before for Naked Security. This is his second article. A lovely chap by the name. He's called Jason Nurse, and he's Jason Nurse PhD, which means, sorry, this is the only joke I'll try. It means that everyone must get confused if he goes to a hospital because he becomes Dr. Nurse. And there he is. There's the article that we published this week. ICU, your home working photos may reveal more than you think. So this seems like an obvious topic, given that we're all using technology like Zoom much more extensively than we used to, both for home reasons and for work reasons. And given that we all like to have, impressive looking stuff in the background, books, diplomas, trophies on the wall, or that we're publishing photos saying, hey, look how cool my home office is. How much does this really give away? And is it dangerous? And in that article, we published a couple of example photos. They won't come out very clearly here because the contrast problems when I shine them at the screen. But there's one. Obviously, these are staged. There's a picture that someone taken with you can imagine there's a laptop in the photo as well as the person. In fact, you can't really make out the person, but it's straight at the screen. And actually, it says this is a confidential document on the screen that you can't read. And if you zoom in really carefully, even at the tiny resolution that we compressed it down to for the article, there's actually a little puzzle if you want to try it later in the article, nakedsecurity.sophos.com. There's actually some text. There's a password written down on the page in the background. And of course, another thing that we couldn't resist publishing this one, because it's a cute puppy photo. But of course, when you're taking pictures around your house and obviously you're unlikely to pose your dog next to a computer, but if the dog's indoors, it's going to be somewhere around something that relates in some way to your life. So is this a big deal and should you worry about it? Well, our readers had mixed feelings about this. So one chap wrote, I don't disagree with any of this, but I do think it might be a little overblown. So his argument was that Jason Nurse's thesis that you could find out information that could put you at some risk, that he was kind of overstating it. But I think this person was kind of thinking more about passwords you might reveal than what you might call a death by 1,000 cuts of privacy, where somebody who isn't supposed to know something suddenly is able to present themselves as much more intimate in your circle of friends or colleagues or family because of little bits of information that they've picked up possibly over a long period of time. So this person went on to say, slowing the crooks from gathering the information in photos might help weaken their attacks for a while, but the only actual defense is to make sure that information isn't a key to more. Now that's a very good point. What he's saying is that, if you're going to spend 20 minutes fussing about trying to organize your dog's collar so the little tag you've got on with his or her name engraved on it is hidden, then you're wasting your time when, if that's a problem, you should be going and changing the password that you named after your dog in the first place. That's very true. But if you read the article, what you will see that one of the things that you will see Dr. Nurse present there is information that he has been able to discover without doing anything naughty, without doing any kind of hacking, simply looking at stuff that he's found that people have published, either because they've been in meetings that have become public, or they're in photos that the person has deliberately published inside their home environment. And I'll read from the article here. He says, analysis of images of home working environments has revealed work email inboxes. So this is where a photo is taken, there just happens to be a computer there, and there just happens to be some windows open. And remember, modern mobile phones capture a surprising and astonishing amount of detail. They have many, many megapixels, and their quality, even in poor light, is amazingly good. And when you publish things like a big photo on Twitter and the person clicks and zooms in, they can actually see it at the full detail when you took it, not merely the little detail that you see when you're just glancing at it. So he says he's revealed work email inboxes, internal emails, names of individuals in emails, private web pages, potentially sensitive internal business correspondence, software installed on computers. That kind of matters to an attacker, right? And internal identification numbers of devices. So that's things like computer names, volume IDs for things like USB drives, all that kind of stuff. And if you think that that's largely irrelevant and the crooks can probably guess what software you're using, well, that's no need to make it easy for them to find out exactly what it is. Because if you may have an application that you think is fine, it might be an esoteric application which is unique to your business or is not widely used, it might have known vulnerabilities, and if the crooks can see it there, you've just basically given them the keys to the castle if it's an application that has a vulnerability that they know how to exploit. It would have taken them a lot more effort to find it if you hadn't published it in the photograph. And as for stuff in the background, well, there's a famous case from Brian Krebs. You may have heard of him. He's an investigative journalist who runs a website that looks into cybercrime. He goes digging around to see if he can put two and two together when cyber attacks have happened. He's a very influential, very thorough journalist in how he goes about finding stuff. A couple of years ago, he published an article where he had reason to go. He wanted to try and find out who was behind some particular cyber criminality, and all he had was he strongly suspected that X, which was a regular identity online, hadn't done anything dodgy, and Y were in fact the same person. So X was a kind of regular online persona, Y was if you like, the dark web or the underground persona, and he wanted to try and stitch these together. And eventually he discovered a video that X had published in which there were screenshots, and by zooming in just in the video, he was able to find in one frame or a few frames, there was a tab open in that video that showed the account Y apparently logged in to an account under that name. So it wasn't just that Y's name appeared there, it was strong circumstantial evidence that X's computer included a browser tab where that person, the user, was logged in intentionally as Y at the same time. So he was able to make, it wasn't proof obviously, but it was a strong inference based on something, just a few pixels that had leaked out in a screenshot. So that is the kind of thing that Jason is warning you about in this article, that it doesn't really matter if you give away this stuff, but you have to bear in mind the kind of things that people might know. And so I said that there was some controversy. So we had that first user saying, I think this is overblown, kind of, there are bigger fish to fry. Like if you're worried that they might work out your pet's name, they probably know it anyway. And if you have passwords named after your pets, that's your bigger problem. However, the thing is that if you think about that stuff in the background in your life, a lot of it is either harder to change than, say, your credit card number or even your passport number or your social security number. It's harder or impossible to change because it's just part of what makes you you. And it's always going to be something that is associated with you in a way that gives somebody who knows it a way to pretend that they're closer to you, that they know more about you, that they're closer to your inner circle than other people. So not necessarily you, could just be your friends and family and colleagues, that they're closer to you than other people would otherwise think. So you can get a new credit card number, but you can't get a new birthday. You can get a new address, you can move, but it's quite complicated. But the things you can't do is that diploma in the background that said, oh, I got a degree from such and such a college in such and such a year. That's always going to be part of your history. It's always going to be one of those tidbits of information about you that you may not have disclosed to everybody. The fact that there's a trophy on there that says you won the best batsman of the year in the 2016 T20 cricket league in your local cricket club, you should be very proud of that. By the way, I'm into cricket, but my name Duck. There have been people who've asked, is your nickname Duck because of your prowess at cricket? I'm sorry to say it might have been, but the reason is simply that it comes from my name. But that fact, if you've won that cricket trophy and it's on the shelf behind you, that's always going to be something that you did. And it's always going to be something that somebody else who knows it can use to suggest to somebody else who knows you that maybe they're kind of more trustworthy than they really are. And of course, while you're in meetings, there's another problem. So another reader took the opposite approach. He said, look, what you should do is just try and cut out any extraneous information altogether on the grounds that once you've given it out, you can't get it back. So he said, rather wryly, I've had to do a series of long meetings where people were required to be on their own in a room for security reasons. And I have seen things in other people's bedrooms that I would rather not have seen, he said. So we wonder what they might be. He said, I use an old green tablecloth that I drop down to cover the wall behind me, and then I use a virtual background so that A, there is nothing I might inadvertently give away, and B, it looks professional. And then, as he wryly says, at least my approach saves me causing participants embarrassment. Well said. So, having said all that, is this a huge deal? Should we all get terribly worried about it? Let me finish with a few tips. Now, some of these are Jason's tips from the article, and there are a couple more general advice items that I'd like to give you. So they're just 6 quick tips in all. So the first one is, these come from Jason's article, the first one is very simple. Be mindful of what's in shot when you take a photo or when you're in a meeting where there's live video running. It's as simple as that. Think about what's there beforehand, because once it's in the shot and the shot's gone out, you can't stop it being there afterwards. Secondly, as our commenter pointed out, consider a virtual background. Zoom, for example, allows you to do that, or use background blurring, which many apps support these days. They do a good, if not a perfect job of stopping things in the background from appearing inadvertently. Having said that, as our commenter pointed out, if you want to use a virtual background in something like Zoom, green is the best colour, then you just avoid wearing anything that's green. You don't get many people who have green skin, for example, so that means that you don't disappear into the image. And by hanging something on the wall or putting something behind you, I have a white screen that pops up in one of those pop-up ones. They're relatively inexpensive. They're very handy, but they're not quite as handy or as easy to fold back up as the online videos show. But it's very, very useful, because once you put it up, you know that if there is something on the wall, it's occluded by that background, and that makes your virtual background in something like Zoom work much better. Tip number 3 is be aware before you share your screen online. This is very important because it's really easy to share stuff by mistake. And if you have a teleconferencing app that allows you to share by application window, try and use that instead of sharing your full screen, because it just means that other things that won't creep into shot by mistake. And by the way, if you are sharing your full screen, or even if you're relying on the conferencing app restricting it to one app's window, before you start a call, before you go into a meeting, make jolly sure that you turn off any apps in the background that could produce on-screen pop-ups or notifications. And by the way, when lockdown ends and we go back to real conferences where you stand on the stage and you talk to an audience, you need to keep doing that then, because we've all been in conferences, I'm sure, where you're looking up the screen and while the person's talking at you in the background, messages, instant messages are just popping up that they subsequently really, really wish you hadn't seen. Jason's 4th tip is to watch out, don't get easily sucked into online trending stuff like hashtag working from home, hashtag my home office, hashtag my cool setup. It's great to be able to share that with people while you're in lockdown. It's good, clean fun, except that, as I said before, when you take photos with your mobile phone of your home office, they have much more detail than you probably expect. And so, very simply, you need to be careful about the fact that don't give away data or don't take photos of your screen because you're really proud of the way your office is set up just because everyone else is doing. Remember those 3 simple words: stop, think, connect. My fifth tip, this is not one from Jason, this is one I'd like to add to the article, is If you are going to be taking photos of necessity around the house for work purposes, or doing videos in various rooms, you know, and your house, if you don't live on your own, you probably share it with other people who be friends and family. So there'll be some of their stuff in there, and be mindful of that. Try walking around your house or your flat and looking at all the things that are on display, and do what you might call a role play with yourself. Look at things like that cricket trophy you won in 2016, the diploma to college, the maps you've got on the wall, the books you've chosen. Go around looking at those yourself and do a kind of a role play where you imagine that you are a scammer trying to scam, say, one of your cousins that you haven't seen for a while, or a friend that you haven't met because it's lockdown, or one of your colleagues. Try and imagine trying to convince somebody else that they know you really, really well based on the information around. You will be amazed at the things that you think up. And basically, if you know your enemy, if you know how they think, you are much better placed to defend against them. And lastly, perhaps most importantly, because this works generally, it works for all types of sharing that you do online. Don't be surprised or amazed, and don't be more inclined to trust somebody because they know things that you think it's amazing or surprising that they know about you or one of your friends or one of your family members. 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago, almost definitely, there are things that if somebody was able to mention them to you on a phone or an email, you'd think, you know what, they claim to know my cousin really well. There's no way they could have found that information out if they didn't. It's just too esoteric. The problem is you just need to accept that these days there are those little bits of maybe not terribly important private data, but that can be used to give someone a kind of cachet that they don't really have, to pretend to know you, to socially engineer you by pretending to be someone they're not. That kind of information is you should assume it is comparatively easy to come by these days. So if somebody seems to know something and is kind of inviting you to infer from that they must be closer to your circle of friends, family or colleagues than would otherwise be possible, don't accept that anymore, because it's very possible that they got that information because it was accidentally revealed. So very quickly, just run through these again, and then I'll leave you with a little poem of 3 lines that will help you with all of this. So, number 1, be mindful of what's in shot when you're taking photos or doing online video calls. 2, consider using a virtual background or background blurring together with a physical background of a uniform colour if you can, because it makes that feature work much better. Be aware before you share your screen, and prefer sharing apps rather than the whole screen, and turn off notifications before you start. Don't be sucked into trending topics online where everyone's saying, hey, come and show us what your home office is like. It's tempting to join in, but be very careful, you may give away more than you intend. Tip number 5 is try walking around your own house and imagine how things like photographs, paintings, maps, diplomas, trophies, etc., how you might use those if you're a scammer, because know your enemy is a fantastic move in cybersecurity. And the last tip, don't be surprised if you're suddenly in touch with somebody who wants you to think that they kind of closer to you than they really are, simply because they know things that 10 or 15 years ago they would not have been able to find out. These days they probably can. So very simply, to summarize that into 3 lines, folks, I see you and what you do, so be aware before you share, and if in doubt, don't give it out. Thanks for listening, everybody, and until next time, stay secure.